Hello, my name is Jouni Vilkka and this is my channel, TFF Teacher from Finland. Once again, I have some questions for you. Why do you live? Or do you really even live? Or is your life better described as merely existing? Is there a purpose in life? Yours or even more generally? What's the point of it all? These are the kinds of questions most people think about at least sometimes in their lives. Trying to answer those questions is to practice philosophy of life. To have a coherent philosophy of life, you have to have a goal in living. That goal then directs your choices. Like William Irvine writes in his book, A Guide to the Good Life, The Ancient Art of Stoic Joy, having a philosophy of life can dramatically simplify everyday living. If you have a philosophy of life, decision-making is relatively straightforward. You simply choose the option most likely to help you attain the goals set forth by your philosophy of life. In the absence of a philosophy of life, even relatively simple choices can degenerate into meaning of life crises. It is, after all, hard to know what to choose when you aren't really sure what you want. The most important reason for adopting a philosophy of life, though, is that if we lack one, there is a danger that we will mislive, that we will spend our life pursuing goals that aren't worth attaining, or will pursue worthwhile goals in a foolish manner and will therefore fail to attain them. So, what is a goal worth attaining? Most people seem to think that what they most want is happiness, and that different people can find happiness in very different ways. But it may not even be clear what happiness really is, or it can be different for different people. Throughout history, philosophers have given various answers to these questions as well. As Irvine points out, the primary goal of most ancient philosophers was to help ordinary people live better lives. Philosophy of life could arguably be considered the most important and certainly the most practical part of all philosophy. This is presumably also the reason why some bookstores miscategorize philosophy as self-help, or self-help books as philosophy. Be that as it may, I will be providing practical advice as well as lots of important things to consider about actual life in this and the following videos. This video begins the section on philosophy of life in my series Introduction to Ethics. I will dedicate this first video of this section to the idea of Eudaimonia and the Hellenistic philosophy schools. The most important of them, Stoicism, I will cover in the second video, which will include lots of practical advice from 2 millennia ago. In the third and last one, I will talk about more recent ideas such as humanism and existentialism. If you are interested in the philosophy of life or ethics in general, you should perhaps consider subscribing to my channel and clicking the thumbs up button. I have previously mentioned some of Aristotle's ideas about happiness in the video on virtue ethics. Ancient Greeks, like Aristotle, were concerned with virtues and the thought that a virtuous life would be a good life. The idea was that there are certain ways of living excellently, displaying courage in battle, as well as good thinking and wisdom in public matters like governing, enjoying pleasures and all aspects of good life in moderation, and living a dignified life in general, gaining the respect of the other citizens in the process. The good life, eudaimonia, was not merely the experience of a momentary feeling of happiness, or a life of luxuries and pleasures, but rather something one could say about a life once it was over. It was, on the whole, a good life. A life full of pleasures might have been full of pleasant sensations, but it could still have been vacuous, devoid of a significant purpose. It would not have felt meaningful, and in the end, it would not have been a good life. For Aristotle, the good life would include a significant allocation of time spent practicing philosophy, but I think we can accept that most people do not need that much philosophy in their lives. Yet, having never spent any time thinking at all seems unbefitting for a human life as well. A well-rounded person has some experience in all the important aspects of human life. Of course, what is considered an important aspect of human life may vary quite a bit from culture to culture, or even person to person. If you wanted to know how to achieve happiness, this may not sound like an answer, but that is perhaps because you are making the mistake of pursuing happiness for its own sake. The point of the good life is actually in line with what psychologists have discovered, in that if you want happiness, you must not seek it. Trying to become happy is bound to fail. Instead, try to focus on important things, whatever that means for you, living ethically, virtuously, as well as you can. When you lose yourself in matters more important than your insignificant little life, probably working together with other people to achieve those important goals, your life becomes meaningful, and you may even have momentary experiences of happiness. More importantly, when reflecting on your life, you no longer experience meaninglessness and self-hate, but can even be proud of your accomplishments, whatever they are. Remember that we all have our own obstacles, and few of us are equipped to slay dragons. Enjoy each success, no matter how small it might seem compared to the greatest achievements in history. There's no point in comparing yourself and your life to others. Just focus on all the small goals on the way to the bigger goals. For additional building blocks for your own philosophy of life, let's look at the history of philosophy. The Hellenistic period refers to the time when Greek-speaking Hellenic culture influenced the Mediterranean world after the death of Alexander the Great in 303 BCE, before Common Era. The end point of this period can be placed either in 30 BCE, when Rome conquered Ptolemaic Egypt, or even as late as 330 CE, Common Era, when Constantine the Great moved the capital of the Roman Empire to Constantinople. The vast areas conquered by Alexander were greatly influenced by Greek culture, as Greek-style cities, religions, and other forms of culture, including philosophy, were spread by the conquerors. When Rome conquered much of the same area, Roman culture started to be greatly influenced by Greek culture. So much so that the elites in Rome actually spoke Greek, not Latin, amongst each other. Greek culture conquered Roman culture and became a very cosmopolitan culture. In earlier times, at least in democratic city-states, it was possible for a citizen to have some influence on their community, but now those city-states had been overcome by huge empires. It seemed that there was little an ordinary person could do about the big events of the world, such as wars, and in general life seemed uncertain and outside of anyone's control. That kind of uncertainty and powerlessness typically causes anxiety and unhappiness. It was perhaps because of the prevalence of such gloominess that several philosophy schools gained popularity. They taught different ways of achieving happiness. Rather than positively trying to create happiness, most of them were actually focused on ways of avoiding unhappiness. These were actual schools that taught dedicated students, not just schools of thought in the sense such things exist in present-day academia. And the students typically made membership in a school a big part of their personality. These schools no longer exist as institutions, but they have had lasting influence on philosophical ethics. The most important of these schools were the schools of the Cynics, the Epicureans, the Stoics, and the Skeptics. The one that had the most influence, not only during this period, but through the Middle Ages as well, was Stoicism, and it is also the one I will be focusing most in this section. Because I am going to spend so much time on that one, I will make a dedicated video about Stoicism, discussing all the other ones in this one first. The Cynic school was founded by a student of Socrates called Antisthenes. The name of the school comes either from their meeting place near the gymnasium of Kynosarges or from the way their most famous representative lived. The name Cynic can be understood to mean dog-like, and Diogenes of Sinope lived a bit like a dog in the opinion of the masses, in that he did not care about social norms and did not aspire to the kind of life most people thought desirable. If you think of what you may have learned to think of as signs of success in life, like a prestigious job with a fancy title and lots of income, possibly fame, at least on social media, a big house, a luxury car or two, a good-looking spouse, aren't these what most people seem to value? But are they really the sorts of things that will make you happy? The job is likely to be very stressful. All the material possessions can be lost suddenly, and they cost a lot of money, possibly leading to debt. And your spouse may only be with you because of your apparent success. And none of those things matter much if you find yourself gravely ill. So, maybe Diogenes was onto something after all, even if his example was perhaps a bit extreme. He fulfilled all of his physical needs in public if he felt like doing so, and was content eating food that had been thrown out, garbage to other people. According to a famous anecdote, he even lived, at least at one point in his life, in a barrel or a large ceramic container. The mightiest ruler of the time, Alexander the Great, according to this story, visited him, offering to give the famous philosopher anything he desired. Diogenes only asked that the great man step aside a bit, as he was blocking the sun. The important point about this philosophy of life is not that you should live in poverty, but rather that to attain happiness, you have to keep your mind independent of things external to it. This autarky, self-rule of the mind, is certainly important, but it is not easy to achieve. For example, things like pain, pleasure, sickness, and love are all external to the mind. The mind may be forced to experience them, but what matters is the attitude toward them. As long as you are able to regard such things as irrelevant and insignificant, they hold no power over your happiness. Even if you get a high-paying but stressful job, you can see how unimportant it is. This may enable you to actually experience less stress, as you refuse to allow the job to define you, and accept that it is only temporary. Similarly, even if you suffer from an illness, your suffering may be eased by the realization that it too shall pass, one way or another. By detaching yourself from everything external, you can be free and happy, or at least retain your peace of mind. You probably noticed already that this cynicism has nothing to do with the current way the word is usually used. The cynical attitude of believing the worst of all people is something completely different, and is unlikely to be what is meant in a philosophical context. Hedonism is a term that is nowadays understood as referring to only the enjoyment of pleasures, but it was actually originally a Hellenistic philosophical school. Aristippus of Cyrene was an early proponent of the view that is sometimes called primitive hedonism. It is the simplistic idea that life is good when one enjoys immediate pleasures, eating, drinking, fulfilling one's carnal desires. While in some ways correct, the view is not philosophically satisfactory. You can imagine yourself being pumped full of drugs that make you feel constant pleasure. It may not be realistic, but you can imagine that this state never goes away. You can stay in that same state of bliss for the rest of your life, just lying on a bed with drugs and necessary nutrients constantly being pumped into your body. While this might cause you to have constant sensations of pleasure, you probably wouldn't think that kind of life as a good life, or even one worth living. If you disagree, let me know in the comments below. Epicurus represents a more reasonable or prudent kind of hedonism, often called epicureanism for obvious reasons. Instead of seeking immediate pleasure, this philosophy urges you to seek the greatest pleasure. Mental pleasures are valued higher than physical pleasure, and a peace of mind lasting a lifetime is considered better than some fleeting peak experience you might be able to experience occasionally. In fact, the Epicureans emphasized avoiding disappointments more than seeking great pleasures. A calculating, careful way of life can enable you to live a tranquil, good life. Epicurus thought that the problem with merely seeking pleasure is that too much pleasure, such as eating too much food or drinking too much wine, will cause suffering in the form of nausea or hangover. The key to real, lasting peace of mind is moderation, that classical virtue. So, rather than seeking great pleasure, the greatest total pleasure is actually achieved through avoiding suffering. A simple life is much better than a gluttonous life that includes a lot of nausea. Similarly, one might enjoy the power of a political office, but that would come with rivalry, threats from enemies, stressful responsibilities, and so on. Lots of causes of unease. It is better then to withdraw from the politics and public life of the polis, to tend to one's own garden, enjoying only the company of select friends. This is what Epicurus did, although he may have created something like a cult around himself. Epicureanism, as the name suggests, was mostly based just on his thinking, and so did not develop much over time like the theory and practice of the other philosophy schools. But Epicurus did provide us with a suggestion for a way of life that avoids causes of stress, so he is remembered in the history of philosophy for that. The fear of death, for example, Epicurus confronted with the rational argument that it is really nothing to worry about. Literally, we only exist as individuals because of the way our atoms make up our living bodies. When my body dies, I will cease to exist, just as I did not exist before I lived. I will not be around after my life, so I will never experience death, and therefore should not fear it. The problem that remains, of course, is that while I will not experience being dead, I will experience the moment of dying, which is not likely to be pleasant. As a way of life, even if possible to some, Epicureanism is not very ambitious. It does not lead to social improvement, because that would require political action. It does not really lead to advances in science, art, or anything else either, because that would require active participation in society as well. It may be an understandable choice, similar to simply focusing on enjoying entertainment, doing your job and keeping your head down, being uninterested in politics, and avoiding taking any responsibilities. That can be an understandable choice for a way of life, especially in countries where voicing your opinion can get you imprisoned or killed. But it certainly is not a morally excellent position. Clearly, it would be more praiseworthy to at least try to do something about the problems of the world, improve it somehow at least, even if only very slightly. There is one idea Epicurus had that actually is very useful and is being practiced by many, probably without them knowing of the connection to Epicurus. He wanted to know what things he actually needed in life, and which he could live without. The only way to really know if you need something is to try living without it. It is not uncommon these days, at least among the environmentally aware, to reduce the number of objects in their lives the same way, putting them aside for a time and later getting rid of them if they haven't been needed. Of course, it is more important to really think of the object's necessity before acquiring it in the first place. If you haven't needed it before, you probably won't need it, and shouldn't get it. For example, if you can borrow, you don't need to own it. Pyrrho of Elis is usually considered to be the founder of Skepticism, or at least of Pyrrhonic skepticism. He argued especially against trusting one's senses, and in general against claims to knowledge. He did not start an actual school of his own, but his teachings and fame spread anyway. In the 3rd and 2nd centuries CE, the academy, founded by Plato, was so strongly influenced by skepticism that it has been later known as the skeptical or new academy. The most famous teacher of the school during this period was Carneades, an excellent orator who skillfully defended opposing views with equal force to show that neither view could be known to be true. Platonism returned to the academy in the 1st century CE, pushing skepticism out, only to be replaced in the 3rd century by Neoplatonism, a mystical view emphasizing strange metaphysics and focusing on the transcendental. I will not discuss Neoplatonism further in this context because it departed significantly from the secular, rationalistic philosophies of life of the Hellenistic period that I am focusing on here. Pyrrhonic skepticism was revived by Aeneasidemus, who lived sometime in the 1st century BCE. He has been called the first Pyrrhonic skeptic because he left the academy, which he considered too dogmatic, to found the first Pyrrhonic school. This form of skepticism became famous and was promoted most importantly by Sextus Empiricus, the last important skeptic of antiquity. Afterwards, philosophy was practically replaced by mystical movements until being suppressed by religious authorities and made a mere handmaiden of theology. You may be somewhat aware of skepticism, or at least the word skeptic in present-day usage, and may find it strange to encounter these terms in the context of philosophy of life, or ethics in general. You may think that it's a term that belongs only to epistemology, and possibly the philosophy of science. But originally, skepticism, at least in the Pyrrhonic version, was a philosophy of life with the same goal as the other Hellenistic schools, the achievement of happiness, or rather peace of mind. Ataraxia. Skeptics did, though, think that epistemology is a key to achieving this tranquility. By suspending judgment, epoche, and thus giving up beliefs, you cease to be affected by passions. Suspending judgment is not the same as claiming that all statements are false, but rather the acknowledgement that everything is uncertain, even the statement that everything is uncertain. Avoiding all opinions makes us quiet and free from distractions. The skeptics used several arguments to show that we do not have knowledge, by which they meant that nothing is known with certainty, because knowledge was understood at the time as requiring certainty. For example, they pointed out that we can change how we see by pressing our eyes from the sides. As other animals have different kinds of eyes, they probably see things differently as well. They also noted that we have different senses, and no way of knowing if any of those senses give a more accurate understanding of reality than the others. Further, the observer may sometimes be intoxicated or asleep, and thus have a very different understanding of reality than at other times. The skeptics were also aware of different cultures and people and their different customs, laws, religions, and so forth, and so none of such views can be accepted as the truth. The skeptics even argued against the validity of logical inferences, noting first of all the fairly obvious point that induction is not a valid form of inference, in that it is not truth-preserving, as we might say. You can observe any number of white swans, but inferring that all swans are white would be a mistake. Or you might similarly observe black ravens, but you can only know that all ravens are black if you have observed them all. But if you have observed them all, you need no inference anymore. More interestingly, the skeptics also argued against deduction. The classic example goes as follows. 1. Socrates is a human being. 2. All human beings are mortal. 3. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. The problem with this inference is that it is based on the claim that all humans are mortal. But the only way we could know that is either through induction, which is problematic as we have just seen, or by observing all human beings. But there are currently living human beings. Should we try to kill them to find out if any of them are in fact immortal? Or should we wait for them to die of old age? But in the meantime, others will be born. So we do not actually know if the premise is true or not. The skeptics did accept that ordinary life requires us to make some kind of judgments and accept some sort of beliefs, but they emphasized that what they were arguing against is absolute certainty, not probability or how things appear to be. They insisted that absolute truth is unattainable to us, and so in practical living we have to settle for much less. It is prudent to abide by the law and refrain from making claims about absolute right and wrong, for example. They opposed dogmatism, which they saw as going beyond what could be justified rationally. While for the skeptics of the Hellenistic period, this was a way to achieve a peace of mind, you can perhaps see the connection to our contemporary scientific skepticism. That is the view that we should essentially refrain from believing anything to be absolutely certain and only accept claims to the extent that they are justified by science and reason. Extraordinary claims that go against the consensus of science require extraordinary evidence for us to accept them. This movement is very new, and while it is not usually understood as a philosophy of life, it is a major part of secular humanism, which clearly is a philosophy of life. I will return to that later when discussing more recent types of philosophy of life. People like Marcus Tullius Cicero could see that none of the philosophy schools around was perfect for them. Instead of following any one of them, they decided to pick and choose what they liked in any of them, and form their own eclectic worldview and philosophy of life. Eclecticism was never an actual school of philosophy, but especially now it seems very popular as a way of life. Many people eclectically adopt various ideas, beliefs, hobbies, habits, and even rituals from all over the world and from different historical eras. If they do so rationally, basing their choices on proper evaluation of the arguments for and against those claims, they are practicing philosophy as I understand it. Unfortunately, I suspect most people have no method to their choices except perhaps their own aesthetic taste. That I would not call philosophy of life or philosophy at all. I am yet to cover the most important of the Hellenistic philosophy schools. Because I have so much more to say about Stoicism, I will make a separate video about it next. It will include lots of practical advice as well, so stay tuned. That's all for now. Bye! If you wish to support my channel, please click thumbs up, subscribe and share my videos. Any comments on the videos would also be welcome.